Welcome to the Teamwork Advantage podcast with Greg Gregory. Join us as Greg interviews powerful thought leaders and successful team and leadership experts from across the country on teamwork, leadership, and organizational culture. Now let's check in for this week's episode.
Welcome to the Teamwork Advantage. Hello, everybody. My name is Greg Gregory, and this is a podcast that's dedicated to the growth and development of teamwork, leadership, and culture. The three things that really drive every single business. It's the human factors, if you will. We bring folks to you every week that are designed to help you increase your level of all three of those, whether it's at work, in your church or synagogue, or in your home life. All levels really are what Teamwork Advantage is all about. And yes, it can even work with your kids' football teams, your soccer teams. So we take it all the way across those levels as well. It's kind of funny when we look at all of that. So joining us today is Jared Hummel. And right now, he's definitely got a lot of experience in teamwork. We'll talk about that today. But currently, he's an experienced business leader in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area with a history of building startup organizations into streamlined, revenue-generating companies. As president of Parka, currently he leads a strong financial background and motivated by enhancing growth and finding solutions to complex operating and execution-based challenges. He enjoys working with company leaders to integrate digital strategies into overall business decisions. With an emphasis on nurturing clients and candidates through automation to drive revenue. At Parka, he combines his finance operations background with marketing background to help fuel growth for the company as well as for its partners across the country. He's also got a background. Yes, he's from Minneapolis, has a background in hockey, and we're going to talk about that today as well. Welcome to the Teamwork Advantage, Jared.
Hey, thanks for having me, Greg. I really appreciate being on.
Yeah, it's always fun to get somebody who's got a background in business and sports that ties the level. So a lot of folks want to know, how did you get started? How did you get into where you are today? You didn't come out and just say, hey, I'm going to be president of this digital marketing company and get there all of a sudden. How'd you get there?
Yeah, a long, windy path. But I think to your point, it started early on in sports, like being over 10 years into my professional career now. I still find myself routinely going back to examples and things that happened in my sporting days that have, positively or negatively affected how I run organizations. And so, like you said, a hockey guy from the state of hockey in Minnesota, had the opportunity, basically starting at 8-9 years old, all the way through college to play on some really high performing teams with a lot of guys that are now playing in the NHL or overseas. And so I think from an early age, not only does sports teach you teamwork and work ethic and all of that, but you get to see patterns throughout all those years of teams that maybe weren't supposed to be great, but came together and did something awesome, or teams that, had all the stars that you could possibly have on a team that could barely be 500. And I find myself, continuously in my work environment going back to some of those lessons we learned. But from there, I always say I'm industry agnostic. The one thing that keeps me grounded is that passion for building high performing teams, building great cultures, and being a leader. And so I actually started in plastic manufacturing, where we built a company that ended up having about 30 employees before it was sold. From there, I got into plumbing and heating and some turnaround efforts around that. For those of you listening, if you haven't been in turnaround environments, they're very, very interesting times in organizations. And then actually how I got to where I am now is that after doing some of the turnaround work and selling that first plastic business, my wife wanted to go get her doctorate. And I was like, well, I can't keep working 18 hours a day stressed out if she's going to be studying 18 hours a day and stressed out. So I began my career in staffing and recruiting as the CFO for Verseek Search and Consulting, our sister company. And then we were talking, Greg, briefly before the show of, about 3 months after I started, Parka was kind of a hobby. It was a passion project of our CEO and owner, and the leader of that company left, and Tony asked me if I would kind of step in as the head of that. And I was like, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't know anything about sales or marketing, but I guess I'll give it a whirl.
It's evidence again that you don't necessarily have to have the background there, as long as you surround yourself with the right people and build the right team.
Right. Yeah. And that's been, we haven't necessarily had millions of dollars to invest. So, the crew that we had when we started and the group that we have today are significantly different, but, it's been pretty cool to watch us, not only move upstream with the type of clients we have, but, our last few hires are some of the leaders in digital marketing agencies in the Twin Cities that have come not necessarily looking for a new job, but kind of get the itch with the culture that we have and what we're trying to build, and have joined our team. So it's been fun to watch it happen.
Yeah. So you're coming at it from a very interesting perspective. You're working with the hiring, staffing side of things, but on the marketing side of things as well. So you're kind of getting a multi-pronged approach, if I'm seeing it correctly.
Yeah, well, I would just say for those that aren't familiar with staffing and recruiting, it's pretty much the consummate sales run organization. If you look at 80 to 90% of staffing firms across the nation, they're run by really high-end salespeople, which means that, generally their solution to everything is hire another salesperson or hire another recruiter. And what we're trying to do, and what Tony's vision was when Parka was started, was like, that's kind of an outdated, old school mentality that with the rise of, Google, which sounds weird, but with the rise of Google and LinkedIn and Facebook and Google jobs and Facebook jobs and Indeed and Monster and ZipRecruiter, like, there's all these ways to drive clients and candidates into staffing and recruiting organizations without having to hire 50 people to make cold calls. And so that's kind of the premise, is this industry is, probably 5 to 7 years behind most industries when it comes to really performance-based marketing, where you can use metrics and data to make better decisions. And so we're really trying to, it feels weird because marketing's obviously been around forever, but like, we're trying to be that cutting edge of really performance-based marketing for an industry that's not necessarily great at marketing.
It still, though, boils down to, will someone be a good fit to the company? So it boils down to the human interaction. So it still comes down to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it still comes down to a face-to-face or a Zoom to Zoom, if you will, meeting with somebody to get a feel to make sure they're a right fit. Am I on target there?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And even, a big thing we talk about is candidate experience through the candidate hiring process. And there's a lot of technologies that are even coming out now where they have like video job descriptions, or video, like, instead of having a hiring manager meet 100 people, of which, 90 might not be a great fit, like, they do video snippets where, as like a qualifier, there's 3 to 5 questions that someone has to answer on video that comes back to the recruiter, and then they can get a good snapshot in 3 to 5 minutes versus a half hour of their time. But to your point, that's really what our clients are doing, are trying to be that matchmaker of finding the right people for the right roles in the organization. And so, as I said, our sister company Verseek has an executive search firm, and that hiring process can be 3 to 4 months for a CEO or a CFO, because they're doing cultural assessments, they're doing background checks, they're doing they're going on site to the company that's hiring the new CEO, interviewing different people on their team, and really making sure it's the right fit. So our clients are the true matchmakers. What Parka is trying to do is just drive the volume of candidates and to our clients to then vet out and make sure that they're a good fit.
So that brings us to the point. Once that person is a good fit, then their job begins, whether it's a turnaround or whether it's building on something, whether it's still just taking off where it's going, somebody else has moved on or retired. What challenges are leaders facing today? In this pandemic world, things have changed and continue to change, even as we may emerge out of a pandemic. So what's happening? What's the latest going on that leaders are facing today in your eyes?
Yeah, well, it's starting to feel a little overdone, but I mean, the Great Resignation is the thing that everyone's talking about today, and it's definitely something we're seeing on our side as we try to drive candidates to our clients. Is just the market is absurd. Like, I don't know how else. There's no calm way to put it. Like, a lot of our clients and Verseek's owners have been in this business 25 plus years, and they'll swear on their grave that they've never seen anything like half as this crazy. And so, yeah, it really, it comes down, I believe, what caused it was just the way leaders behaved essentially throughout the pandemic. The decisions that they made to cut wages or cut pay, or what their remote work policy was. Obviously, especially in Minneapolis, but across the nation, like you had everything that happened around George Floyd and the racism and all of that. And so leaders had a 9 to 12 month window where they were being judged incredibly hard on the decisions that they were making from a culture standpoint in the organization. And now you're seeing the effect of that, of people had a lot more time, they were away from the office, and all of that, to kind of consider what they wanted out of their career. And then not only that, but you also have baby boomers who are already exiting the workforce at a record number, with millennials kind of taking over or trying to take over some of that leadership bandwidth that was being left behind. And obviously, I mean, there's a million studies on that too, of how baby boomers operated in a different fashion than millennials. So I think,
oh, absolutely.
So I think, those are some of the two biggest things going on right now, is just a complete changing of dynamic when we talk about the things, that you're passionate about, Greg, of teamwork, leadership, and culture. I mean, I feel like they're completely being redefined in the, not post-COVID world, because we're still dealing with it, but
it's interesting because you talked about the boomers and you talked about the millennials, and we skipped right over Generation X.
Yeah, that's true.
And the reason is, in my eyes, if you go back and look at birth curves, obviously the baby boomer was a huge birth, and then Gen X was very small. And that was a transition, because at that point, the older boomers weren't having kids. And so that generation is one of the smallest generations in history. So there's not a whole lot there. So now the millennials are having to grow and then leapfrog, if you will, at times. Is that kind of what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, like I gave this example a few times, but when I was in plastic manufacturing, two of our vendors were Dow Chemical and LyondellBasell, or Equistar, which are, both publicly traded global companies. And it's just crazy because, like, they would have sales teams that each salesperson was in charge of billions of pounds of raw material annually, and their whole sales staff was over 60 years old. And like, there was no contingency plan, there was no leadership development plan, there was no middle ground. And so, to your point, like, the Gen Xers kind of got left behind, because once these big companies identified the issue at hand, the people starting the leadership development programs were kids straight out of college, and that was 10 years ago. So that was kind of the heart of the millennial group, were the ones getting the opportunities to really grow into those leadership positions, at least in a few of the companies that I was working closely with.
Yeah. And that's some of the things I'm starting to notice as well is the leadership roles and people moving into them. Do you feel that the millennials and are ready for those leadership roles? Have they had a sufficient experience? I guess I'm going to be polite and just simply use the word experience.
Yeah, well, I think that is one of the issues that the bigger companies are dealing with is how how do we get them up to speed? Because how we started the podcast was like I didn't just wake up one morning and all of a sudden become president of Parka, right? Like there's a lot of stress marks throughout throughout my time, whether it was sports or more specifically business that allowed me to get here. And so some of those, you can provide the best, in my opinion, you can provide the best leadership training in the history of the world, but at some point people have to go through hard times. And I mean, even just watching how our owners, went through COVID is like, they had went through the .com bubble, they went through the '08 recession. And so like the maturity that they handled this with, like, you can only get that by going through other crazy life circumstances. And, as a millennial myself, like I tried to learn from it, but, until you get another rep at it, I think it is hard. So,
oh yeah,
obviously there's very smart millennials and there's millennials doing great things, but that doesn't mean that they have the same, trials and tribulations and struggles and decisions that the baby boomers made over the course of, their 40-year career.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I've noticed. There's some that are very, very successful and strong on one part, and the other part, there's those that are like, I don't care. I don't want to do anything. I just want to live life. So you got the extremes there, which makes it difficult. So as a leader, that brings me to the question, as a leader today, what are some of the keys to building strong teams today? What do you think? What's the key? Is there a silver bullet, first off?
I wish anything in life had a silver bullet, but I don't think that exists. No, I just think that in general, the skill sets needed to be an effective leader today are different, right? Like I'm sure when you were getting started, Greg, or even people older than you, like unions were a big thing, and like starting and ending. Like my mom retired 2 years ago. She worked at 2 companies her entire life, and that's just not not really how the millennials operate. It's really around trust and empathy, flexibility, work-life balance, like all these new buzzwords, quote unquote, that you're hearing now. But I think it's a lot less loyalty based. In our industry, we work with direct hire firms and contingent labor firms, and like they say, by 2025, 65% of the labor force is going to be contingent labor. And so companies
let's define contingent labor for folks right now. Some people may not be on board with what that means.
Yeah. So contingent labor would just be any kind of consultant, contract, temporary, something where you're not necessarily tied W-2 to a company. And so what you're seeing, bigger companies and smaller, but like bigger companies is, we have a lot of Fortune 500s in Minneapolis. So like Best Buy, like they need to build a new application, for one of their devices. And so they bring in a team of 25 A-level application developers to develop that. As soon as it's developed, like those people are out of there, right? Like, and another example I give is like there's a group that does only FDA testing for med device equipment. So instead of a startup hiring 10 people to help them through FDA testing, they'll just hire 10 contractors to help them get through the FDA testing. If it succeeds or fails, those 10 people are out the door the next day on to the next thing. But it really allows for expertise in certain skill sets, and then moving around.
And that greatly reduces the overhead costs for the company too.
Right. Yeah. You're paying a company like Verseek to staff that person. So there's obviously an upcharge for consulting and staffing firms to make money, but on the other side, like you're not offering benefits, you're not offering sick time. As soon as that project's over, you don't have to retool the employee to like go on to a different thing. Like they just leave. And so I think that's, people are really becoming known for a specific skill set, not necessarily, a loyal employee for 25 years.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back. What's the key to building a team today? What's the key to putting a team together for whether it's a contingent workforce or contract or whether it's a full-time? What's some of the keys to putting a team together?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to, even if it's contingent, like there's still an aspect that is culture, teamwork, leadership. And so, like I say, like I've run a digital marketing agency for 4 years. I've never been in Google Analytics or Hootsuite or any of the tools we use, because what I did when I went in there is I said, I know how to build teams, but I don't know anything about digital marketing. So I'm going to go find experts in each of the areas that we need. And then even though our employees are W-2, like our leadership team meets every week. Like we've fought and battled through things together. Like we're a team, right? And I always say, like, I have enough work experience to make good decisions, but we've avoided bad decisions. Now as an organization is a great time for us to make great decisions as we continue to scale. And so I think just that kind of like trust in one another, having that true north of what you're trying to accomplish. I think people in general love attaining goals, at least driven people like attaining goals. And so providing clarity as a leader, I don't know if you're familiar, I don't think you would compete against like EOS. So it's called the Entrepreneurial Operating System. But that's something that we use in all of our companies at Verseek and Parka, but it really sets out like that 10-year vision, what our mission is, what our tagline is, who we're going after from a marketing perspective, what our 3-year goal is, what our 1-year goal is, what our quarter goal is. and that keeps it, but then, every quarter we update it, and I can hand that out to everyone on the team, whether they were in the room or not making those decisions, but it keeps everyone aligned on what we're trying to accomplish. So, I think, from my perspective during this great resignation, Parka, knock on wood, has been lucky. Like we haven't lost one single person. And so I say that's an anomaly, because most digital agencies have lost 40% of their workforce over the last 9 to 12 months. And so we do that by, Tuesday, Thursdays, we have huddles where the only rule is you can't talk about work. So we build that blended work-life balance. And then, like I said, like, I think it would be weird probably 20 years ago, even though I wasn't in the workforce, of like our director of digital, him and I play tennis twice a week, every week for the last 3.5 years. Our director of content and creative babysits our dogs, like when my wife and I go on vacation. But it's that like blend of work life where it's not just hierarchical, it's relational, right?
Yeah. And there's 15, 20, 30 years ago, it was always said that, your work and your life are so separate.
Yeah.
And that if you ever ask somebody at work, what'd you do this week? None of your darn business. Those were the responses that you might get. Today, we're starting to cross over that. And I think, I shouldn't say start, we have been crossing over for the last several years. And it's so important because we spend so much more time at work than we do with waking hours, sometimes with our own families. And so we've got to blend that and make sure that kind of comes together. Is there a secret sauce that you look for when you're looking to hire somebody? And when I say a secret sauce, not just for your team, but is there something that every leader should be looking for when they're looking to hire somebody and bring them on board to their team today?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is secret sauce, but to date in the 4 years at Parka, and even in some of my previous roles, like I always did the first interview. And the reason I did that was culture, because like you could have someone interview with a subject matter expert and they get wowed with a skill set they have, but if they're not a team player, I don't really want them on the team. And so that's how I always start with me interviewing first. If I don't see them as being a culture fit, then I don't really care what their skill set is, because one bad apple can, rot the whole tree pretty quickly. And so,
oh boy, we're pulling out the Osmond brothers now, aren't we?
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a reference even way older than you.
But yeah, that's my secret sauce. Like, I wouldn't say that it's very secret, but I think, even like good managers sometimes get stuck in kind of that, I don't know if you call it like groupthink of, they want to hire people that are just like them. And so they go into the hiring process looking for like their clone. And
they're mini.
My philosophy is like the opposite, is like, I know what I'm good at and I know what I'm not good at. And so I try to put people around me that are opposite of me. And, sometimes that makes it a little uncomfortable, I guess, or you have to kind of see through things you don't believe in, from, whether it's political or blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, that's not really my business. My business is to create a high performing team. And to do that, we need a whole cycle of different qualities in our team. So I think that's, one thing I've really learned, throughout my history, is just not to build a carbon copy footprint, but a very diverse work group.
So where did that mindset come from? Did it come from your days of playing hockey and sports? Where did something of that nature come from, your team oomph, your team spirit? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I've been lucky enough being in the state of Minnesota to play with a lot of really, really good hockey players that have played on Olympic teams and in the NHL and all of that. And when you're young, you're in awe by some of that, right? And so you think, oh my God, like I'm on this team with 13 people selected for the national development program or whatever. And you're like, well, this is going to be a cakewalk. Like, we're going to win every game, win the championship. And then you come to find out you have, nine forwards that don't like to go in the corners and don't like to get hit and, don't want to pass the puck. And then all of a sudden you get to the end of the season and you're like, well, what the heck happened? On the reverse side, you've been on teams where everyone said, man, you're going to be lucky to be 500 this year. You're going to be lucky to win a few games. And the team just randomly somehow comes together and gels in a way that, like when I started at the college I went to, they hadn't won the conference in 60 years. The year before, they were 3-22. They had the first two games that I played as a freshman, we lost 5-1 and 8-3. And then all of a sudden, like, it flipped and we had like 4 good players. And we ended up winning the conference that year for the first time in 60 years, because it was just a ragtag group that believed in each other. We fought for each other. There was, goofy people. There was, really intellectual people. There was people that, and it was just like, whatever it was, like everyone came together and believed in it. And we literally went from, being one of the perpetual worst teams in the division to winning it. And then the next 4 years, we went from having 2 or 3 Division I level players to, like, by the time I graduated, we had 19 Division I type players. And that was because they saw like what was being built. They wanted to be a part of it. Like, they wanted to make an impact, and all of a sudden it changed the entire culture. And so
there it is. There it is. Okay. The team can drive a culture, or the culture can drive a team.
Yeah.
It literally can work in every direction. There have been teams in the past where one player is a superstar and the team loses a game and the superstar is celebrating, and then the next night the team wins, but the superstar didn't do very well and the superstar is sulking. And more than one occasion that player has then, not long after that, been traded because they're not playing with a team mindset.
Right.
It's getting the team to come together with that mindset. So when we stop to think about that, your leadership style, how was that shaped? In other words, what are you doing today that you can directly tie back to your days playing hockey?
Yeah. I mean, just the experiences that I had and like the coaches that you had, and you understand, like we were talking about Miracle and Herb Brooks before this, and like my coach when I was in high school was very out of the Herb Brooks era, and the way he, like, I still use him as an example today, because like he would expect 11 out of 10 effort from you, but there was also a level of trust there. And as you went through 4 years of playing with him, you understood like everything was calculated, it wasn't emotional, it was calculated. And so like there was always a point early in the year where a freshman that made the varsity team would get just railroaded and like screamed at and have to skate in front of the whole team. And it was that like moment to humble a very good player that was young, that no one's better than the team. And then 3/4 of the way through the season, when you're in the dog days of the season, he would kick one of the senior captains off the ice at a practice, just to like get everyone's attention back, that even though he was a captain and a senior and had earned his stripes, again, no one was better than the team. And so it's just those things that you learn throughout playing sports, that when you come to work, right? Like, there's been times where I feel like our team is just in a lull and everyone's kind of just going through the motions, and I'll go into a leadership meeting and just kind of blow it up and walk out and say, like, you guys figure it out, right? Like, you guys band together. And so there's sometimes like I have to be the bad guy to bring the team closer together and bring out new ideas. And it's just all those little I don't know what you call it, like, not ticky tack, because they're very influential, but there's times when our teams beat up and we literally go around the room and just talk about what we appreciate about each other, and it gives a time to to really step back and say, like, we are actually all friends and like we can make stuff happen. So
well, okay, and that's a key point there, and that really helps develop a level of trust among the players. Okay, and again, I'm using the word players, not necessarily referring to sports, but in your case, in your office, the players on the team. There has to be that level of trust, that people know each other, they feel for each other, they want to back each other, they want to support each other. The military is probably the greatest at doing that, is breaking down an individual to build up the level of the team. So those all come together. So now let's kind of take it into the hiring process. Are there certain types of questions? Are there certain types of things that you look for? Let's just look at your situation here at Parka. Are there certain types of things that you're looking for when you're bringing people onto your team that kind of come into play? What are they?
Yeah, I mean, not that
by the way, you mentioned culture earlier, and I got that. Yeah. But are there certain things that you're watching for? I'm going to go back to the Herb Brooks analogy. In the movie Miracle, he is quoted as saying, "I'm not looking for the best players, I'm looking for the right players."
Yeah.
And that's absolutely key. What are your right players?
Yeah. I mean, I'm biased a little bit towards athletes as we're talking today.
Okay, so, wait a minute. Is that your mini-me then?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of different types of athletes, obviously, but I think the skill sets you learn being an athlete, and honestly, like, it could be speech or theater or something where you're driving forward as a team. I think I like to hear the illustrations of that throughout the interview process, but I think the way I interview is not probably traditional and probably doesn't work at big companies, but I like to hear what people have to say. Like the less you talk and the more they talk, for me, is better in an interview, because I ask simple questions of, what do you like to do? Or tell me about, like, the most accomplished thing you've ever done, or tell me about why you want to work. What are the 3 most important things when you work at your next, job? And people, like, you can tell their preparation, you can tell what they're passionate about, you can hear the inflection in their voice, and all of the things that surround that are really important to me, because someone that just wants to come in and like check boxes based on their job description doesn't always mean that they're a great fit, right? Like, to your point on the Herb Brooks quote, and why I interview first is because there are a lot of people that are accomplished in their career because they were an SEO manager for 10 years. Well, that's a given. Like, at that point in your career, I expect you to be above average at your job, right? But when you're looking at, do you fit in on this team, it's a lot of soft skills, and the best way I know how to do that is just coming into an interview that's essentially a two-way street, where it's like, well,
it's a dialogue.
What homework did you do on Parka? What do you want to know about Parka's culture? What drove you to apply? And just hearing how their thought process works. To me, I mean, granted, like everyone else, by no means am I 100% in the hiring process. Like, there's always that level of risk, but I think I go into it to learn about people's soft skills and how they prepare, what they're passionate about, versus tell me about how you log into the back end of Google Analytics. Like, give me a example of writing that you do. And even after me in the interview process, like, we always have them then interview with the hiring manager, but we then have them interview with 3 or 4 members on the team, from individual contributor to director, because I say, like, well, this is the team that you're coming on. If this isn't the team for you, then I would be happy to, give a recommendation to my other friends that run digital marketing agencies. Like, don't come here if it's for $5,000 more, or you hate your current work environment.
Yeah. When companies give feedback, how important is it for the company to give feedback to the candidate coming in to be hired? In other words, let's say that person A is coming in and they don't get hired. Do you feel it's important for the company to give that person feedback about why they weren't selected?
Yeah, I mean, I try to over communicate all the time. I can't say that I'm always great at it.
No, it's not always done, but exactly.
Yeah, no, I do think, I mean, every company is different, right? Like, some companies you might just not check the box. Other companies, one of the things that drives us nuts at Parka is, like, when someone comes here and says, I want to learn digital marketing. Well, like, we're not in the business of training people on digital marketing. Like, we're in the business of getting our clients results. So if you haven't taken the time to do, you can do HubSpot training, you can do Google Analytics training, you can do, like, there's all these things you can do to say, like, well, I think I want to be an SEO specialist. And if you don't have the experience, but you put in the work, like, then we're willing to work with you. But to come explore on our dime, like, doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's, like, feedback that we try to give in the interview process is, like, great person, like, doing a lot of the right things. This is why we didn't.
Right. So there was a situation years ago where a young woman was going into a company and had no background working in Microsoft Word Office, none of the Office suites. And yet that's all this company used at that time. Okay, they were still coming out of things. And it was asked, it says, you don't have any experience there. Why should we hire you? And the candidate said, because I will learn it before I start.
Yeah, right.
And that took the manager back. And she says, I gotta try this.
Yeah.
And she hired the person. And that person went on to be the best support person working in that organization they'd had in 15 years.
Yep.
So it's grasping it. It still comes down to a hunch, doesn't it, when you go to hire?
Yeah, that's when you say like a silver bullet or whatever. I like that's where I wish I wish there was one. But to your point, like it is, with experience, you probably get a little better gut feel, but it's still a hunch, and it's examples like that solidify it, right? Like that we have two people on our team that went through the interview process. We loved them. One just happened to have someone we felt was better for that exact position, and 6 months later we went back to her and said, hey, like I know we didn't hire you for that, but like we loved you as a person. Now we have the right role for you to be successful. And and then another guy that had applied for a role, and we're like, like we don't have it. It was, I think, almost a year later that we called them up and said like, okay, like now we always liked you. We didn't have the right role for you.
Right.
Now we do. And now he's been here, a couple of years. So I think it's a mix of the gut versus the can they do the job, but
you got to have the minimum job skills. You got to have the minimum job skills and the right fit. Jim Collins in his book, of course, wrote, get the right people on the bus, get them in the right seats. Yep. And then most organizations forget the next one, and that's get the wrong ones off the bus.
Yeah.
There are times that in the hiring process, we're bringing people on and they may run their life cycle. How hard is it? And are there things that we should look at? I guess what I'm asking is, how quickly should we cut strings and release somebody?
Yeah. I mean, that's spending most of my career in high growth startups or turnarounds. Like that's a continuous issue, right? I mean, if you're growing 5% a year and just kind of, going about your business, it's probably slower. But in the 4 years of Parka, like we've already went through probably 3 different iterations of employees. And that doesn't mean that they were bad employees. It just means like we've moved upstream, like we require a different level of employee. And so it's hard because, I say all the time, like out of all the people we've hired since I've started at Parka, maybe 1 or 2 have been truly like bad apples. I wouldn't call them bad people, but just, not great hires.
They weren't on the right bus. They just need to be on a different bus.
And now we're honestly going about it again. Like we just hired an executive vice president to run our operations, and she comes from another level up of where we're going. And so we're going through that exercise of like, who fits where, what does it look like? And does everyone have a seat on the bus? And so it's hard because I always say like, I've never hired someone to fire them, but at the same time, like as your organizations grow, like some people rise to the task and others don't. And it's the unfortunate part of business, right?
Absolutely. We always have to grow and we got to change. And that's the great parts of that. As we get ready to wrap up here, Jared, let me ask one question. What's the one thing that you would change in what you've done in your career growing? What's the one thing you would change?
I would probably say we'll call it the Fab Five, but the people that you surround yourself with, both personally and professionally, I can't remember who says the quote, but you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And, part of being entrepreneurial is that I'm probably way too stubborn and try to do everything myself. But as I've grown and matured a little bit, I think as you reflect back, the sooner you can find mentors and peers and even in your personal life, like a group that, really pushes each other to be the best and really helps you grow your career, your psychology, all of that would be something that I wouldn't say that I've necessarily always done the best job at.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And that's, being open, honest, allows yourself to be a little bit vulnerable. And we know that when you're vulnerable, that makes you a better leader. So that's absolutely the great tools that we've got there. We've had a lot of fun on here today. The Teamwork Advantage is a podcast that's dedicated to the growth and advancement of teamwork, leadership, and culture. And once a week with the Teamwork Advantage, we learn skills that you can implement immediately. Until next week, remember, having a good week is just being average. When you listen to the Teamwork Advantage, we know you're not average. So go make today and every day excellent and exceptional. Take care. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Teamwork Advantage with Greg Gregory. Be sure to like, subscribe, and activate the bell icon to be notified of future episodes. To learn more about how Greg can help your organization develop a powerful winning culture, visit TeamsRock.com. That's TeamsRock.com.